Okay, sorry, I had to get a glass of water. Nah. Okay, so if you're having a hard time picking up what was going on, I'll just throw it out there. Boo killed Bob Ewell. But Heck Tate didn't want to tell the town that because it would make Boo a hero, and the last thing that Boo wants is to be brought in front of people. His whole life, he's been hiding by choice, not because somebody made him. Um, and so that's why Mr. Tate was, or Sheriff Tate was like, he fell on his knife at it because you have to understand that. We can't bring this poor, shy man out in front of everybody. That would be killing him. Like it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. And here's a little piece of advice too. Whenever you see an object or something in the title of a book, it's usually a symbol for something else. The mockingbird in this book is Boo. By the way, that line where he says, "Thank you for my children, Arthur," I'm so glad that I didn't have to read that particular sentence in class because I tear up every single year. But anyway, let's finish this chapter up. We got like 3 or 4 pages left. Or this book up. Oh, sorry. When Boo Radley shuffled to his feet, light from the living room windows glistened on his forehead. Every move he made was uncertain, as if he were not sure his hands and feet can make proper contact with things he touched. He coughed his dreadful, railing cough and was so shaken that he had to sit down again. He searched for his hip pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. He coughed into it and then wiped his forehead. Having been so accustomed to his absence, I found it incredible that he had been sitting beside me all this time. Present, he had not made a sound. Once more he got to his feet. He turned to me and nodded toward the front door. "You'd like to say goodnight to Jim, wouldn't you, Mr. Arthur? Come right in." I led him down the hall. Aunt Alexandra was sitting by Jim's bed. "Come in, Arthur," she said. "He's still asleep. Dr. Reynolds gave him a heavy sedative." "Jean Louise, is your father in the living room?" "Yes, ma'am, I think so." "I'll just go speak to him a minute." Dr. Reynolds left her voice trailed away. Boo had drifted to the corner of the room where he stood with his chin up, peering from a distance at Jim. I took him by the hand, a hand surprisingly warm for its whiteness. I tugged him a little, and he allowed me to lead him to Jim's bed. Dr. Reynolds had made a tent-like arrangement over Jim's arm to keep the cover off, I guess, and Boo leaned forward and looked it over. An expression of timid curiosity was on his face, as though he had never seen a boy before. His mouth was slightly open, and he looked at Jim from head to foot. Boo's hand came up, but he let it drop down to his side. "Well, you can pet him, Mr. Arthur. He's asleep." "You couldn't if he was awake, though. He wouldn't let you." I found myself explaining. "Go ahead." Boo's hands hovered over Jim's head. "Go on, sir. He's asleep." His hand came down lightly on Jim's hair. I was beginning to learn his body English. His hand tightened on mine, and he indicated that he wanted to leave. I led him to the front porch, where his uneasy steps halted. He was still holding my hand and gave no sign of letting me go. "Will you take me home?" He almost whispered it, in a voice of a child afraid of the dark. I put my foot on the top step and stopped. I would lead him through our house, but I would never lead him home. "Mr. Arthur, bend your arm down here like that." "That's right, sir." I slipped my hand into the crook of his arm. He had stood a little. He had to stoop a little to accommodate me. But if Miss Stephanie Crawford was watching from her upstairs window, she would see Arthur Radley escorting me down the sidewalk as any gentleman would. We came to the streetlight on the corner, and I wondered how many times Dill had stood there, hugging the fat pole, watching, waiting, hoping. I'd wondered how many times Jim and I had made this journey. But I entered the Radley front gate for the second time in my life. Boo and I walked up the steps to the porch. His fingers found the front doorknob. He gently released my hand and opened the door, went inside, and shut the door behind him. I never saw him again. Neighbors bring food with death and flowers with sickness and little things in between. Boo was our neighbor. He gave us 2 soap dolls, a broken watch and chain, a pair of good luck pennies, and our lives. But neighbors give in return. We never put back into that tree what we took out of it. We had given him nothing, and it made me sad. I turned to go home. Street lights winked down the street all the way to town. I had never seen our neighborhood from this angle. There was Miss Maudie's, Miss Stephanie's. There was our house. I could see the porch swing. Miss Rachel's house was beyond us, plainly visible. I could even see Mrs. DeBose's. I looked behind me. To the left of the brown door was a long shuttered window. I walked to it, stood in front of it, and turned around. In daylight, I thought, you could see the post office corner. You could see to the post office corner. Daylight. In my mind, the night faded. It was daytime and the neighborhood was busy. Miss Stephanie Crawford crossed the street to tell the latest to Mrs. Rachel. Miss Maudie bent over her azaleas. It was summertime, and 2 children scampered down the sidewalk toward a man approaching in the distance. The man waved and the children raced each other to him. It was still summertime, and the children came closer. A boy trudged down the sidewalk, dragging a fishing pole behind him. A man stood waiting with his hands on his hips. Summertime. And his children played in the front yard with their friend, enacting a strange little drama of their own invention. It was fall, and his children fought on the sidewalk in front of Mr. Bose's. The boy helped his sister to her feet, and they made their way home. Fall, and his children trotted to and fro around the corner, the day's woes and triumphs on their faces. They stopped at an oak tree, delighted, puzzled, apprehensive. Winter, and his children shivered at the front gate, silhouetted against a blazing house. Winter, and a man walked into his street, dropped his glasses, and he shot a dog. Summer, and he watched his children's heart break. Autumn began, and Boo's children needed him. Atticus was right. One time he said you'd never really know a man until you stand in his shoes and walk around in them. Just standing on the Radley front porch was enough. The street lights were fuzzy from the fine rain that was falling, and I made my way home. I felt very odd. Sorry, guys. I felt very odd, but when I looked at the tip of my nose, I could see the fine misty beads. But looking cross-eyed made me dizzy, so I quit. And as I made my way home, I thought, what a thing to tell Jim tomorrow. He'd be so mad he missed it, he wouldn't speak to me for days. As I made my way home, I thought Jim and I would get grown. But there wasn't much else left for us to learn, except possibly algebra. I ran to the steps and into the house. Aunt Alexandra had gone to bed, and Atticus's room was dark. I would see if Jim might be reviving. Atticus was in Jim's room, sitting by his bed. He was reading a book. Jim awake yet? Sleeping peacefully. He won't be awake till the morning. Oh, are you sitting up with him? Just for an hour or so. Go on to bed, Scout. You've had a long day. Well, I think I'm going to stay with you for a while. Suit yourself, said Atticus. It must have been after midnight, and I was puzzled by the amiable acquiescence. He was shrewder than I, however. The moment I sat down, I began to feel sleepy. What you reading? I asked. Atticus turned the book over. Something of Jim's called Great Ghost. I was suddenly awake. Why'd you get that one? Honey, I don't know. I just picked it up. One of the few things I haven't read, he said pointedly. Read it aloud, please, Atticus. It's real scary. No. You've had enough scaring for a while. This is too... Atticus, I wasn't scared. He raised his eyebrows and I protested. Leastways, not till I started telling Mr. Tate about it. Jim wasn't scared. Asked him, and he said he wasn't. Besides, nothing real scary except in books. Atticus opened his mouth to say something, but shut it again. He took his thumb from the middle of the book and turned back to the first page. I moved over and leaned my head against his knees. The Gray Ghost, by Secretary Hawkins, Chapter 1. I willed myself to stay awake, but the rain was so soft, and the room was so warm, and his voice so deep, and his knee was so snug that I slept. Seconds later, it seemed, his shoe was gently nudging my ribs. He lifted me to my feet and walked me to my room. Heard every word you said, I muttered. Wasn't asleep at all. It's about a ship and Three-Fingered Fred and Stoner's boy. He unhooked my overalls and leaned me against him and pulled them off. He held me up with one hand and reached for my pajamas with the other. Yeah, and they all thought it was Stoner's boy messing up at the clubhouse and throwing ink all over, and He guided me to the bed and set me down. He lifted my legs and put me under the cover. And they chased him. And you never could catch him because you didn't know what he looked like, Atticus. When they finally saw him, why, he hadn't done any of those things, Atticus. He is real nice. His hands were under my chin, pulling up the cover, tucking it around me. Most people are, Scout, when you finally see him. He turned out the light and went into Jim's room. He would be there all night, and he would be there when Jim waked in the morning. That's To Kill a Mockingbird. Well, how can I put it? No. I don't know. I love this book. Do you guys know what the whole story was about? It's a story about how Jim broke his arm. Because if you go back to chapter 1, when I was nearly 13, my brother Jim got his arm. When he was nearly 13, my brother Jim got his arm badly broken at the elbow. The whole book is about how Jim broke his arm. Okay, so recap. I will give you guys a test over the study guide, the second part of the study guide. I will, and then at the end of it, I'll ask you about a couple of themes and see if you'll write a couple of sentences about it for me. All right. Well, you guys have a good night, and I will talk to you next week. And don't forget, you can call me, you can talk to me, and do whatever you want. And I'll give you advice. I'll tell you what I think or whatever. All right, guys. Have a good week. Be safe.